Hey everybody, welcome to Phoenix Kitchen. Today we made homemade blueberry maple sausage links and served them up with blueberry biscuits and homemade maple butter. Let's see how we did it. Alright, as we start every recipe, we're going to grab our handy dandy scale. We're going to measure out the meat that we're going to use for this sausage, which will be pork. This pork in particular came from trimming a Boston butt and a little bit of spare rib trimmings. To go in, we're going to be using a 2-pound batch because we're making breakfast links. Breakfast links, as you know, are not nearly as thick as a bratwurst. We're going to be using a small casing, and because we're using that small casing, we don't really need a lot of meat to produce a lot of sausages. So we're going to do a 2-pound batch. The recipe is obviously down below. Once we've got our meat already weighed, for this particular batch, there's nothing else for me to do. I cubed this up before I put it in the freezer when I was trimming the other meat for other cooks. So it's ready to go. We're going to get our spices all weighed out and then get this meat through the grinder. Okay, as you probably noticed in the seasoning montage, there weren't as many seasonings as we normally use with our breakfast sausage. That's because this is not a sage-based breakfast sausage. We wanted to make sure that we're blending flavors to go well with the maple and the blueberry. So this is a very simple recipe using salt, pepper, coriander, nutmeg, a little bit of cayenne for some heat because you want that against that sweetness of the blueberries and the maple syrup. It's a really nice, simple sausage that has a lot of flavor. So we're going ahead and measuring out our maple syrup. I highly recommend using a good quality maple syrup. The better your syrup, the better your sausage is going to be. Please do not use something with high fructose corn syrup that pretends to be maple flavor. Okay? Use something that's derived from natural maple. And find the best quality syrup that you can. It's really going to make a difference. All right, and as I go through and pick out my cup of blueberries, we're going to be picking the smallest blueberries I can find in the package. You can see here there's quite a difference in the size in one package. So we're using these smaller ones to go in the sausage because they're going into the small casings. And then we'll use these nice large blueberries for our biscuits. All right, with all the prep work done, it's time to grind the sausage. You'll notice there we are using our medium die for this. Normally for breakfast sausage, I use a coarse ground, but we're gonna go ahead and go a little bit smaller to get a finer grind because we're putting this through, like I said, into smaller casings to make breakfast links. So we'll get this all ground up. It's great because using the stand mixer, I normally have to keep loading the hopper, but the full 2-pound batch fit right up in the hopper, so everything's here in one easy go. It's nice and hard and partially frozen, so we're not going to be gumming up the works. We get a good clean grind. We got a nice blend of lean and fat, and we're going to end up with a delicious sausage. All right, with our sausage ground up, it's time to go ahead and mix in the seasoning. We're just going to pour that in, mix it around by hand. Once we've thoroughly mixed the seasoning, right, we want to make sure that every part is seasoned equally so you don't have big bites of flavor in one and no flavor in another bite. We're going to get that mixed around, then we're going to add in that maple syrup. That's going to actually loosen up the meat a little bit, getting that liquid in there. And that'll make it then easy to incorporate these blueberries without smashing them. So we'll get everything mixed up and then it'll be time to stuff. All right, we're going to go ahead and get the sausage stuffer loaded up. We've got the 21 millimeter tube on there, and we're going to be using the 21 millimeter collagen casings today. They are edible casing, but they are not the natural hog casings that we would normally use. To get something small enough for link sausages to do natural, you could use sheep casing. But today we're going to use the collagen because I've been wanting to try those out for a while. So we've got 21 millimeter collagen. These things are dry. They do not have to be soaked. They are not stored in salt. So they do not have to be rinsed in any way. We're going to put them on dry and get them stuffed. All right, so we've got our sausage stuffer clamped to our tabletop, and we're going to get this thing all loaded up. The very first thing we're going to do is bring that plunger down until it actually makes contact with the meat, and we're going to fill the tube with sausage. We want it all the way to the end because that way we are not puffing air into our casings. We're putting meat into the casing as it should be. So we're going to go ahead and get that ready to go and then slide these casings on. All right, as we start to put on this collagen casing, the very first thing that we notice, it's obviously not wet because we did not soak it. That means it's not as slick as the natural casings. So I have to work a little harder to push. It's weird. It's easier because they're not all twisted up like natural casings can be. But you do have to push just a little harder to get that on there. When you get it on, you really have to try to get as much as you can. You are not going to fit the entire tube on there. That's for sure. These things come, it makes 42 feet when it's stretched all the way out. So we load up exactly what we need. We bring it out just a little bit, and we're going to snip that off. I'll tell you that it is much simpler to tie the knot because these are not wet. All right, and once we get this thing tied, we do want to make sure that we give our casing just a little bit of a push to make sure that we didn't let any air get in. We want to fill that up. That's why we have that meat all the way out to the end of the tube. Once our knot is secured and we've made sure that we don't have the air in, then we're simply going to load this up. One of the cool things that I figured out about this collagen is it is much easier to work with as far as filling. You can fill it right up. It's not going to have the elasticity of natural casings. It's going to get to a point where it's full and then kind of stop. Now you could obviously overfill and blow it up, but I made this entire batch without blowing any out. It was amazing. You'll see there we just went ahead and filled the entire length of tubing up, left one end open so that I can pinch to make my links, and then as we come around for that last link, we'll simply tie that into a knot, and then we're going to move everything to a wire rack and then just repeat these steps until we're done. All right, we've got everything ready to go. We're going to take this rack, put it on a pan, and into the fridge until I'm ready for them in the morning. They come out looking nice. You can see the spices. You can see the blueberries. It's amazing. Now with these ready to go, we're going to get those into the fridge. One thing I want to point out, you'll notice in the recipe, there is no curing salt. These are not cured. They're designed to be made in small batches, kept for about a week, and then cooked immediately. We kept these out about a grand total of an hour to make them, so they're totally safe, especially considering how cold the pork was to begin with. Just make sure that you're using your food safety protocols as you're cooking. If you're going to have it out for a longer time, or if it's not that cold to begin with, go ahead and put it back into the fridge before you case it. Let it cool back down and keep it safe. So what we're going to do here, we're moving on to make our maple butter so that it's ready to go for our breakfast tomorrow. It's a very simple recipe. We have had this stick of butter softening at room temperature. We're going to mix it with maple syrup and a pinch of salt. This is unsalted butter. If you're using salted butter, you obviously will not need the pinch of salt, but it does help. The salt helps to bring out the flavor, really makes that maple sweetness pop. One thing we discovered as we made the biscuits the next morning, and we tried it, it was absolutely delicious. But one thing I'll tell you, you should try, if you like it, just a little bit of rosemary. Just less than a quarter teaspoon, just a little bit, because it goes a long way. But we added that to it as an afterthought. It just hit us as we were eating. Spread that onto another biscuit. It was amazing. It popped so hard, and it was so good. It was delicious without it, but just as we ate, we thought, man, rosemary would be good. So we decided to try just a little bit of it, and I guarantee you that's the way we'll make it from now on. Anyway, we're going to get this all mixed together. We're going to get it all whipped up and put it into a container and then into the fridge so that it's ready for us the next morning. We'll pull it out early so that it can soften, so we'll be able to spread it onto our biscuits. All right, it's the next morning, time to make some breakfast. So we pull those links back out. We're gonna go ahead and grab the scissors and cut these apart. These, I didn't have to leave them together overnight like you would with a natural casing, because these casings are already dry. There's nothing to dry out. And we filled them all the way up. So there's, nothing waiting for it to shrink down. But what did happen by leaving that overnight is the muscle fibers in the sausage, they come back together and help to hold their form, right? After we've gotten them all ground up and mixed up and emulsified, they'll bind back together. So we're leaving those and they'll hold their shape. We could literally cut the casings entirely off of these and they would hold their shape at this point. So we're going to go ahead and get these all clipped and ready to go. We'll get a few for us to have for our breakfast, and we'll go ahead and package the rest, put them in the fridge. Because these are not cured, they're not smoked, we're only going to keep these in the fridge for about a week to 10 days tops. We're going to make sure that we're cooking them fully, all the way to 165 degrees internal. That'll keep them safe and delicious. All right, with that done, we're going to go ahead and get started on our biscuits. This will be the most time-consuming portion of the morning. We're going to go ahead and preheat our oven to 400 degrees while we're getting these biscuits made. We'll be cooking at 400 degrees for 10 to 15 minutes, depending on the thickness of the biscuits and exactly how your oven cooked. I can tell you today, mine took about 12 minutes to come out perfectly done. So while we're gathering our ingredients, you'll notice I've got 2 bowls. I'm going to measure everything out into 1 bowl and then run it through the sifter. That's because I don't want to accidentally get a big mouthful of baking powder or salt because I didn't sift everything together and get it mixed properly. So we're going to go ahead and measure that out, starting with our 2 cups of flour. We're going to be using salt, a little bit of sugar, baking powder, and baking soda to make sure that we really get a good rise with these. Obviously butter. Today I'm using whole milk because when I went to the fridge I realized I'm out of buttermilk. Buttermilk would be better. It's always the perfect choice for biscuits, but when you don't have it, you do what you can. We've got our biscuit cutters. We've got our butter really cold. That's one of the secrets to great biscuits. The butter really needs to be cold. You don't want to touch the biscuit dough with your hands as much as possible because the heat from your hands will help to melt the butter and soften it, and we don't want that. We want to use our butter cutter to get that cut into the flour without melting it. We want nice big chunks of butter still in the flour. We're going to then use a utensil to stir that together, bring it together loosely, and then we'll get it onto our board and form our biscuits. Once the dry ingredients have been sifted and the butter has been cut in, it's time to start adding our wet ingredients. We're going to take our utensil and create a little well, and we're going to put about half of our liquid in that well and start to mix by simply not stirring, but just pulling the outsides down into that well and mixing it around. Once we've absorbed that liquid, then we'll go in with the rest of our liquid and continue to pull everything together. We're wanting just clumpiness. We haven't really made a dough yet. We do not want to overwork this. If you overwork your biscuits, they will not rise. They'll be too dense and you can't get them flaky. So we're going to go ahead and mix these together, and then we'll be ready to flour our board and work on that dough. All right, we're going to use a nice large working space, and we're going to flour this area lightly to make sure that our dough does not stick. We are not going to just simply dump the flour. You'll notice we're kind of slinging it across and then smearing it around because we're not wanting clumps. If you just dump it on, you're going to end up with clumps. And we're not looking to add more flour to the recipe. We've already measured that. This is simply to go around the outside and keep it from sticking. So we're going to go ahead and dump everything. As you can see, it has loosely come together, but still in some pieces. We're not going to use our hands because we want to keep that butter cold. We're going to use our utensil here. I've got my little flat scraper, and we're just going to keep folding that in on itself, folding it in on itself until we get this thing to come together into a solid ball. Okay, we'll flatten it down, flip it around, and we're really kind of keeping this thing almost, let's call it a 5x3 little rectangle or circle. We'll flatten it, we'll bring it. Once we've got this, fold it a few times so we can create some flake layers. Then we're going to be ready to start cutting and stacking. Now, as you can see here, I made a classic blunder. I was just making biscuits. I forgot today's video was blueberry biscuits. So now comes the fun part. We've got to incorporate the blueberries into a dough. I got it done, but I can tell you this is much easier if you're not as dumb as me. Remember to add these during the dry ingredient stage. So much simpler to add them during the dry ingredient stage. But we're going to go ahead and add these things in, get them folded around. We want to make sure that we're keeping conscious of not overworking that dough, but at the same time, get those things incorporated. All right, so we've got our blueberries incorporated. We're back on the board. We're using our utensil to bring these around. Now that we've got this kind of shaped into our little square that I was talking about earlier, I'm going to go ahead and cut this thing in half. And we're going to take one half, put it on top of the other, mash those together. We're creating flaky layers inside so that when you pull this biscuit apart, you've got those nice flaky layers. And during all of this, I'm trying to keep my hand touch to a minimum because, like I said, we want to keep that butter as cold as we can. We keep reshaping it, and we're going to go ahead and just do the same thing 2 or 3 times to create sets of layers. We'll cut it in half, we'll stack it, flip it around, fold it, mash it back down. And then once we get our final little square, it's going to be time for us to start rolling out our biscuits. So we're going to use our roller. We're going to make sure we flour it so that it does not stick to our dough. And then we're going to roll this dough out to about a 1/2 inch thick. That's going to be about the right thickness for your biscuits. Obviously, they'll rise a bit in the pan, giving you a nice plump biscuit to work with. So we get this thing rolled out. We've got our biscuit cutter. We're going to make sure that we flour the biscuit cutter so that it doesn't stick to the biscuits. When we cut our biscuits, we want to go with our cutter pushing straight down all the way to the board, and then just a slight quarter turn to release it. And when you bring your cutter up, the biscuit should still be inside. And then you can just pop that out, set it over on a floured section of the board so that it does not stick to the board. And then we'll move them to the pan afterwards. There we go. And then we're just going to go ahead and continue cutting biscuits. When we cannot cut another biscuit, we'll bring all of the remaining pieces together, roll it out again, and keep cutting until all the dough is used. Once you've got all your biscuits cut, we're going to transfer these to either a cast iron skillet or a baking sheet, depending on what you're using. Your cast iron skillet, you'll want to make sure that you grease it or butter it so that you're not going to have any chance of sticking. With my baking sheet, I am using parchment paper to make sure that we don't stick to the pan. We're going to go ahead and put these on. We're going to space them apart so that the biscuits have a chance to grow and rise. We'll get them buttered and then into the oven, like we said, 400 degrees for 10 to 15 minutes. All right, so these biscuits came out golden brown. They smell amazing. You can see the blueberries there in them. The biscuits rose. They're fluffy inside. We're going to go ahead and break one open and get our maple butter on it. Our sausages are cooked and set aside. And right now, while we do this, we've got butter starting to melt over low heat so we can cook some eggs to go with it for our breakfast. We're going to smear this maple butter around. We're going to make it coast to coast. You see that steam rising. That biscuit is still nice and warm. This is going to be amazingly delicious. So here we go. We got our spreader. We whip this around. It's nice and soft as it should be so we don't tear up any of the biscuit. And we're just going to smear it around. Don't be afraid to put a little extra on there because it's just that good. We'll get this all plated up and see our final product. All right, so we've got our biscuit and our sausages plated up. The eggs are getting ready to come off the stove. We'll add those to the plate in a moment, and it's going to make our perfect breakfast with a nice cup of coffee. Absolutely amazing. It's brilliant. That maple and the blueberry and the pork work so well together. The flavors are incredible. There we go. Perfectly cooked eggs on the plate, ready to be just devoured for breakfast. I hope you'll give these recipes a try. It's really something different and amazing that your family will enjoy. Don't forget what we talked about earlier. The one thing that really adds to this and makes it perfect, just a little hint of rosemary with those biscuits. We're giving away a 5-piece cast iron lodge cookware set when we hit 1,000 subscribers. All you have to do is like a video and subscribe to the channel to be entered in the giveaway.